So welcome to Scrolling to Death. Today I have a legislative expert and executive director of Fairplay, Josh Golin. Hi, Josh.
Hi, Nikki.
Thank you for being here. And so I've been talking a lot about the Kids Online Safety Act on this podcast and on social media. And I want to get down to brass tacks with parents on what their lives will look like when KOSA passes. And not the boring legal stuff, but I keep getting questions from parents. How will this bill literally help them protect their child online? So can I lay out some scenarios for you and get your feedback on that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I just, I want to start out by saying that we have not had a bill like this before. And so exactly how it's going to be implemented and enforced is nobody knows. But we can certainly talk about what the bill will empower regulators to do, what parents can expect, and how things might be different.
Okay, perfect. I said I wasn't going to go into the legal stuff, but we just need a quick description. So tell us, what is KOSA?
Sure. So the Kids Online Safety Act is a bill that would regulate how online platforms, including social media that are used by children and teens, are designed. So I think at the heart of the bill is the duty of care that says in the way that you design your platform, including your algorithms, you have to take reasonable care to prevent and mitigate some of the worst harms that young people experience online, things like anxiety, depression, cyberbullying, suicide, eating disorders, sexual exploitation, social media addiction. And you have to design your platform so it's not causing or exacerbating those really serious harms. In addition to that, there are really important reporting requirements that platforms have to do. Young people and parents get new tools that they can use to protect their children online. Platforms have to be on the most protective settings by default rather than starting out with a free-for-all and then sending parents down a maze of settings trying to figure out how to protect their kids. So it's really transforms how these platforms are designed and says that these platforms have a responsibility to children and families and not just to make more money by addicting kids.
Great. Okay. And the key there is by design. And there's some talk going around, some narratives pushed by big tech around what the bill is not. And I want to just touch on that at the end. There are lots of bills out there, state and federal bills around this subject. So why is this one that we need to be paying attention to? What is the status of it in the Senate and the House?
Yeah. So one of the reasons that we need to be paying attention to it is because this bill has advanced farther than any bill to protect children online in over 25 years. It advanced out of the Senate by a vote of 91-3 in July, which is just an incredible bipartisan vote. And now we have turned our attention to the House, where we are trying to get a markup for the bill in September in the Energy and Commerce Committee, and then move the bill to the floor. And so, this bill could be law by the end of the year, which would be remarkable, which would be a testament to the incredible advocacy of so many people, including parents who have experienced the worst online. Given that this bill would be transformative for children and families and has a real chance to pass, my hope is that anybody and everyone who cares about young people online will try and get this passed in the next short few months.
Yeah, thank you so much. So transformative. So how is it going to transform the way that we can manage and approach our kids' social media use? So let's talk about a few different scenarios. I had 6 and then I just thought of a 7th. So we'll see if we can get through them. But these are all things that I've heard parents struggling with when it comes to their children's social media use. So I will read it in the voice of the parent, and then you let me know thoughts. Okay. So number 1 is, I am worried that my teenager is addicted to social media. He can't put down his phone. Will KOSA help with that?
Yes, it will help with that, and it will help in a number of ways. First of all, that duty of care says that platforms need to make sure that their design is not causing or exacerbating patterns of compulsive use. So what does that mean in practice? Well, that means in practice that things like infinite scroll and autoplay are things that likely platforms would not be able to use on children if this bill becomes law. They would need to limit notifications. So if they know that their notifications are causing kids to check their phones incessantly and making them anxious, and they do know this because they survey kids and kids tell them these things, then all of those notifications that are just bombard kids and say, oh, your friend just posted, and makes it seem like, oh my God, I have to get back online right at this moment. Things like that might not be allowed. But it's not just that. Platforms are constantly doing what's called A/B testing to see the results of potential features that they might roll out or change. If a platform was doing that testing and were getting the indication that this was going to lead to compulsive use, then they wouldn't be able to implement that feature. And I think a really good example of a type of feature that I am very hopeful would have to go away is TikTok has a feature. If TikTok senses that a young person is about to log out of their platform or close an application, it holds back a video that it knows will be incredibly compelling to a young person until the moment that it senses they're about to log out. And so what's doing is it's undermining their autonomy. It's like, a drug dealer saying, what do you mean you want to quit? Here's a little baggie. And that's another feature, which I think would likely go away if KOSA was law. But it's not just the features, it's also the tools. And so the safeguard section of the bill gives parents additional controls if their child is under 13 to limit the amount of time that they spend on a platform. If a child is 13 or older, it gives parents the ability to see how much time they are spending on a platform. So part of the battle with knowing if our kids are addicted is actually having the data and understanding how much they're using it. And so this would give all of parents that ability.
Okay. And one other function that comes to mind is Snapchat's Snap Streaks. So encouraging them, they have a score, the more days in a row they communicate with someone they're connected with on Snapchat. And I've started interviewing teenagers now, and that gives them so much anxiety to try to keep that number going that they continue to log in day after day. So that would be fueling addiction, in my opinion.
Absolutely. That is a great example of a feature that I think we could reasonably hope and think will go away if KOSA is law. And what that indicates also is that there are so many of these features that are used to drive addiction. We don't know exactly which ones are the ones that are the most effective. The platforms know that better than we do. But there's all sorts of ways that social media is designed that could change as a result of KOSA. Think about things like public displays of likes, which we know from Arturo Bejar's whistleblowing that young people say, seeing likes and how many likes that other people get makes them anxious. And we also know it's a huge driver of sending kids online. And that when Meta experimented with hiding likes from kids, they said that they felt better and they felt less pressure to be online all the time. These are all things that would be in play if KOSA was law and a regulator could go to Meta and say, this feature we believe is driving compulsive use. Show us what you know about this feature. Show us your internal research about what teens are saying about how this feature makes them feel.
Okay, so a lot of things about addiction will go away, or a lot of things that are driving children's addiction could go away, which will be helpful for parents.
Absolutely.
Okay. So next up, and I've heard this from so many parents specifically who've lost children due to social media harms, and let's talk about cyberbullying. So one mom recently shared with me that she reported her child cyberbully, her and her daughter, many times, dozens of times, and nothing happened. And in the end, she took her life because she was just being viciously cyberbullied, and they couldn't stop it. Will KOSA help in situations like this with the reporting and actually following through on the reporting?
Yes, absolutely. KOSA has a provision that requires platforms to have an easy way for parents to report things that are happening on their platform, requires the platforms to respond in a timely manner. And so I know because I've had these conversations with parents too, when they are in crisis and they cannot get a single person at these platforms to respond, they get automated responses if they get anything. This will require a response from the platforms. And that I think will go a long way towards when we are in these literally life or death situations to be able to address them. The other thing that I think is really important to think about with cyberbullying is that the transparency and the reporting sections of the bill, they will be required to report every year how many reports of cyberbullying they are getting on their platforms. And these numbers, which I suspect will be quite horrific, are not things that they are going to want to report. And so it is our hope and our belief that that will motivate companies to do a lot more to address cyberbullying, because they will not want to report that the majority of kids are being cyberbullied on their platforms.
Wow. The fact that we don't know that number right now is horrific.
Yes.
That they don't have to tell us.
Yes. And we know from Arturo that they report things in very self-serving manners. And so one of the things that I think is so exciting about KOSA is it won't require a whistleblower to get to that real data. Like 1 in 8 kids say that every week on Instagram they have an unwanted sexual advance, or 1 out of 2 kids say they witness cyberbullying every week, and 1 out of 5 kids say they are cyberbullied every week. Like those types of things will not require a brave employee leaking those documents. These will just have to be reported as a matter of course.
Because these are actual children being harmed, like actual children.
Yes.
Like the fact that they're hiding that, it, to me, is criminal. And this, we need legislation to force them to expose that information. It's tough to process. It
is. I mean, one would think that they would just care about protecting kids. We know after, 20 years of this, that will never be their motivation. Their motivation will always be their bottom line. And so forcing them to report will be critical. And
one great story I recommend listeners listen to or watch is my interview with David Erb, who's a Facebook or Meta whistleblower. And he shares a horrific story of how Facebook not only hid the harms to children being groomed and sexually exploited, but then added encryption so that they don't have liability and they can't even track it to protect children. So really horrible actual stories of this in play. So, okay, but let's move on. So my daughter has started restricting calories after watching a video on TikTok. Will KOSA help keep this type of content out of her feed?
Absolutely. So it will do that in a couple of ways. So first of all, that duty of care that I mentioned requires platforms to prevent and mitigate the harm of eating disorders to young people and how they design their platform. And that includes their algorithms. And I think this is a really important distinction to make. If someone is actively searching for the 500 calorie diet, which is something which is very popular on these platforms, that it will not create any liability for the platform for allowing a child to find it if they are searching for it. But what this bill will address is all of the content that is pushed to kids through algorithms that they are not looking for or does not come from somebody that they follow. One of the things that most people don't even know is that more than 50% of what we see in our social media feed these days is not stuff that we've actually chosen to follow or people that we've chosen to follow. It's stuff that the algorithm thinks we want to see. And the algorithm frequently pushes eating disorder content to kids in their For You feeds. So kids express an interest in exercising or some concern about their bodies, and the algorithm just bombards them with pro-eating disorder content. This would make the platforms responsible for pushing that content to kids. And so it would give them a means of stopping that content of coming to kids through their For You page. The other thing that it will do is that kids will have the ability to turn off personalized recommendation systems. And so that means they will be able to have a feed that they have control over if they want it. So a feed that just gives them what their friends are posting or topics that they've chosen to follow, as opposed to those things that the algorithm thinks is going to send them down a rabbit hole and therefore make more money for the platform.
Amazing. Like the good old days when you just saw a chronological feed from people and things and brands that you followed.
Yeah.
That's how it
When
should be.
it was actually social media and not just a
Right.
way of, there was a social component to social media, but
Right.
not,
Right.
that's not so much the case. Yes.
Oh God. Okay. Yeah. Turning off that algorithm, having a chronological feed is huge for me. And I think that's a great way to introduce social media in a safer way to teenagers, is showing them that what they want to see and what they search for is there, but they're not being manipulated or, inundated with things that they didn't search for, and that's not good for them anyways. Okay, so next scenario is, my son just told me he saw a live suicide video on Snapchat. Will KOSA stop this from happening?
I wish I could say yes. I don't know that this will necessarily stop that in this case. I mean, obviously, a live suicide is already completely against these platforms' terms of service. Anyway, if it's live and happening in the moment, it's not clear to me that the platforms will be able to respond or in time for something like that. What it will do is it will, as I mentioned before, is it will make the reporting tools that are better. So that if this is happening or suspected that it's going to be happening, that kids will have more tools to report things like this. The platforms will also have a duty of care to prevent suicide in young users. So if, from their own research and their own understanding of their platforms, if there are things that are leading to these happening more frequently or encouraging young people to do this, those features may have to go away as a result of KOSA. But I don't want to overpromise, like some things like live suicides. Like I think I have the lowest opinion of the highest executives at these companies. But I don't think they, even they don't want these live suicides happening. These are things that are vexing them. I think, so I don't want to overpromise and say that these will definitely go away. That is such a horrific thing that people are doing that, and that young people are seeing this happen.
Mm-hmm. And then you have cases like Anna Schott in Colorado was a teenager. She was served a live suicide video. This was on TikTok. And she, within months to, I think within a year after, she really struggled with that. She saw a therapist about it, talked to her friends about it. She ended up taking her life due to the emotional strain that has caused.
So I want to make a clear distinction. If it's just the presence of somebody doing a live suicide, if it is my friend or I'm a young person, it's a young person's friend, and they are following that person and they are seeking this out themselves, or they have a relationship with this person and then that person does this, KOSA wouldn't necessarily address that hypothetical. If the algorithm is telling you that so-and-so is going live right now and that person is in the midst of about to commit a live suicide, that they would have liability for. So again, the key with KOSA, or one of the keys, is, was that young person seeking it out? Was this an autonomous choice of a young person, or was this something the platform was force feeding to young people? If it's a live suicide that was force fed, that was recommended to young people that didn't ask for it, there would be liability for the platform in that case.
Okay. And that's back to the harmful design of the algorithm and the platforms.
Yes.
Okay. And this goes kind of similarly with the story of Nyla Anderson, who's a 10-year-old, served a blackout challenge video in TikTok's algorithm, did not seek it out. She tried it and passed away at 10 years old. Now, we can talk about that lawsuit and the update last week, which is really interesting. And I'm interviewing her attorney.
Oh, great.
Tomorrow. So listeners will get a lot about that. But will KOSA prevent or protect my child from this happening when they didn't seek it out? And I think we already covered it, but let's touch on this one.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things. So while the duty of care does not explicitly mention things like the blackout challenge, the transparency requirements will require platforms to report the types of harms that kids encounter. And again, as I said earlier, if you have to report, I think that's a huge incentive to want to report lower numbers, and so doing a better job. The reporting tools, increased in reporting tools, will help with things with the blackout, like the blackout challenge. I know you've had Joanne Bogart on your podcast. Joanne's son Mason died from the blackout challenge. Joanne goes on every week and reports all of the blackout challenges that she finds on YouTube and Instagram and TikTok, and almost never gets back a response or a meaningful response. So the platforms would be required to respond in a meaningful way. And then also the ability, again, to turn off those personalized recommendation systems. So it is my understanding from parents whose kids have tried the blackout challenge or the pass out challenge, whatever you want to call it, that it is frequently being pushed to kids, that they're not asking for it, that this is something that gets shown, recommended to them. And so the ability to turn off those recommendation systems and only get the content from people you know and trust.
Imagine if we could see and know how many times that video that was served to 10-year-old Nyla Anderson was reported and ignored before she saw it.
Yeah, no, that would be amazing.
Thank you for all of that breakdown. I have a couple of specific questions. So you mentioned notifications and not sending out as many, or there's some restrictions around notifications. And I know here in California, SB 976 passed, Senator Skinner's bill, and there's specific instruction that platforms cannot send notifications during the school hours and then between 12 p.m. and 6 a.m. on school days. Is there anything specific like that around notifications within KOSA?
There is not anything that specific, but I think one of the strengths of the bill actually is that it's not overly prescriptive in saying, because one thing that you want to avoid in legislation is saying, oh, you only can't do this. And then we know that the platforms will evolve and find all different ways of achieving the same result with a different feature. I think one of the interesting things that it's going to be with this bill is once the FTC has the authority to subpoena companies based on potential violations of KOSA, to be able to see what features they know are actually driving the most engagement, what features they know are driving the most compulsive use. So there's nothing specific that says you can't have notifications between 12 and 6 a.m. But if Snap or TikTok knows that their notifications are driving these patterns of compulsive use, then they would be liable for unleashing those on kids.
Okay. So we're going to talk about some pushback, because when you Google KOSA, or Kids Online Safety Act, you get a bunch of headlines that mention that it's a censorship bill and that it's going to hurt LGBTQ plus kids and allies. So I'll read you a couple of those headlines, a couple articles from August 2nd. So one said that the House kills online child safety bills that could have hurt LGBTQ kids and allies.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I don't even know where to start with that one, but the whole
it's not dead.
Every premise in that headline is wrong. Right. First of all, the bill is alive and well. Second of all, this bill was carefully crafted and even amended in order to make sure that it would not be weaponized against LGBTQ kids. There's a few things going on. First of all, the tech industry knows that if they can mire this bill in things like, fights about LGBTQ kids or fights about abortion and reproductive rights access to information, that once you get it into those kind of cultural flashpoints, that that's one way to kill the bill, because those are hugely divisive issues in our country, and the only way to pass a bill in this country is to have both Republicans and Democrats coming together in significant numbers so that they can override a filibuster. That is definitely a deliberate strategy of the tech industry to fan these fears. But I want to be really clear about a couple of things. We hear that this will cut off kids from community. There is nothing in the bill that will cut kids off from community. This is about and there's nothing that will censor kids or restrict them from finding information. In fact, the bill has what's called a rule of construction that says if kids are searching for stuff, including for information to mitigate the harms that they face online, that the platforms should and can return that information to them. So there's nothing that censors kids. What it does do is address this really harmful and dangerous design that we've been talking about. The other thing that I think is really important, this sort of myth that's been perpetrated by opponents of the bill that social media is great for LGBTQ kids. In fact, LGBTQ kids get bullied at higher rates. They get eating disorder content and self-harm content at higher rates than their straight counterpoints. It's really important to bust this myth that like, oh, yeah, like maybe social media isn't great for some kids, but for queer kids, the social media is a lifeline. The internet might be a lifeline, but the internet is not social media. Like having that access to information, having that access to people who think differently than maybe the people who are in your small town, that's not going anywhere. What's going away are those algorithms that push kids down suicide rabbit holes or eating disorder rabbit holes. That has nothing to do with access to community or censoring kids.
Myth busted, Josh. Good job. And I would direct listeners to Laura Marquez Garrett's LinkedIn and reviewing her recent posts about KOSA, because she has, 20, 30 posts, a series of posts talking about negating all of this. And she is a member of the LGBTQ plus community, and she's done a lot of research on this. So that's another resource for parents to look into. A lot of groups that oppose KOSA, some of the groups surprise me, like the ACLU, I wouldn't think is one that would be on tech side of this bill. Yet I keep seeing them lobbying against bills like this. So the headline recently was ACLU sends 300 high school students to the Capitol to lobby against KOSA. So what's going on there?
Well, I have enormous respect for the ACLU. I have been a donor to the ACLU at various times in my life, and I think they do really important work upholding one of the most important values that our country has. Having said that, they are free speech extremists. They believe everything is speech and everything should be protected under the First Amendment at all costs. So let me tell you about a few other things that the ACLU believes, which I think is out of touch with the majority of people in this country and certainly with parents. The ACLU believed that we shouldn't have restrictions on marketing tobacco to kids. They believe that tobacco companies have a First Amendment right to market a deadly product to teenagers. That, I would say, is out of touch with the majority of Americans. The ACLU believes that revenge porn is constitutionally or First Amendment protected speech, and that, there should be no restrictions on posting revenge porn. So to me, we need to take what the ACLU says with a grain of salt. Their view of what free speech looks like, I think, is much, much different than what you and I would believe. I think if kids have, if this bill allows kids to find the information that they are looking for, if it doesn't do anything to censor what they say to each other, then that is protecting their free speech. The fundamental difference that I have with the ACLU is that I do not think that TikTok has a First Amendment right to send pro-eating disorder content to a teenager who has not asked for that content, because that content will make more money for the platform. So that's the fundamental question for the ACLU. Do platforms have a First Amendment right to send the most heinous and harmful content to minors who have not asked for that content? Again, we're not talking about censoring. We're not talking about keeping kids from things that they are actively looking for. We're talking about platforms sending things that kids have not asked for. And so I think the ACLU on this issue is very out of touch with what's going on online and with what parents want to see.
And I know that ACLU and a lot of the organizations that are anti-KOSA are also funded by or have some funding from the big tech companies. Can we assume that plays a part?
So I think you have sort of two different camps that oppose KOSA. You have groups that are heavily funded by industry. So you have things like LGBTQ Tech and the Center for Democracy and Technology, who take, all or the majority of their funding comes from big tech. And so I think we can safely say that's why they oppose KOSA. And then you have groups that are like free speech extremists who believe that the most important thing is free speech at any costs, including the cost of harm to children. So you have groups like the Electronic Frontier Foundation, which filed an amicus brief in the case where families are suing Snap because Snap made it easy for drug dealers to connect with kids who then died from lethal fentanyl poisonings. Again, do most people think that Snap has a First Amendment right or a right under Section 230 to connect drug dealers to kids and target them with deadly fentanyl? I don't think so. And so I think some of the reporters who report on this stuff, they are in a bit of a tech bubble. Like they spend their time on Twitter listening to EFF and the ACLU and groups like Fight for the Future. And they think that this opinion is somehow indicative of a huge outpouring of public opinion. Mm-hmm. I am extremely confident that if you ask most people, does Snap have a First Amendment right to connect drug dealers to teenagers, that they will say absolutely not. If you ask people, do people have a First Amendment right to post revenge porn, that they will say absolutely not. And so, you have these free speech extremists and you have the industry funded groups, and sometimes they overlap. Sometimes it's the same group. Mm-hmm. I want to make clear, it's not just industry funded groups, but it's these groups that subscribe to this view, which I think is frankly laughable at this point, that if the government would just keep its hands off the internet, that we will have, true equality, true democracy, this just flourishing of society, and that the biggest threat is any kind of restrictions on the internet. And we've had the internet that these groups have wanted for 25 years. And the result is that kids are dying, that we have a mental health crisis, that kids are getting harmed every single day from preventable causes.
Okay, let's cut that there and just talk about how parents can support KOSA and get it to move forward and be passed into law.
So this is a really critical time for us. Every single listener of your podcast, I hope by now that they have contacted their representative and asked them to co-sponsor KOSA. If they haven't, please do so at the Fairplay website. There is an easy link that will take you with a call script, so you can call your representative and leave a message asking them support. If you're too shy to use a phone, you can send an email instead. Those calls are definitely better. If you've done that already, ask your friends and family to do the same thing. We are in a 4-month sprint where we're either going to get this done or not. Congress ends at the end of the year, and then we would have to start all over. Nobody wants to do that. We have a window of opportunity. We have a bill that has overwhelmingly passed the Senate. We need the House to act in a really short period of time, and that means call again, ask your friends to call.
Okay, so fairplayforkids.org, scroll down just a bit to where it says help us pass KOSA, and you can click the take action button. Okay, anything else listeners should know about Fairplay? Anything else you guys are working on, or are we like all in on KOSA right now? For the
we're all in on KOSA, but we're also we're partnering with the Phone Free Schools movement on a big campaign for phone free schools. We think now is the time to get phone free schools, but not just get phone free schools, do it right. And that means a bell-to-bell policy where kids do not get their phones back during lunch or recess, where they are away for the day so that teachers do not have to police everything. We also have a report coming out soon about the metaverse and what's happening there. And it's pretty horrific. And so that look for that in about a month. And the last thing I'll mention is we're also just launching a new program on early childhood screen time. And, we talk a lot about social media and older kids, but the habits and the really trying to addict kids starts in early childhood. And so we want to change the way those apps and platforms that young kids are using are designed as well.
Thank you, Josh. I would love to be involved in getting the word out about that. I'm super passionate about that as well, and agree that those habits you create, or really it's your choice to give the young child the device, those habits that are created in childhood will indicate how they interact with devices and the addictiveness in teenage years and adulthood. And then I will note that my interview with Phone Free Schools Movement, one of the co-founders, Kim Whitman, is live by the time you're listening to this now, listeners. So please learn more about Phone Free Schools Movement through that interview as well. And so I think we covered it, Josh. Thank you so much for all of your work and dedication to protecting kids online. If it weren't for you and your team, we wouldn't, I don't think, have the hope that we have now, and the hope that parents will someday soon be able to really protect their kids online, let them use it in a safe way. So I really appreciate everything you do, Josh.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you for what you're doing, Nikki. It's just so great to be able to have this incredible forum for all of these great people and all the great work that's going on. And you're really creating a community here, which is desperately needed.
Thanks, Josh. I appreciate that.